what I'm going to do is I'm going to just talk a little bit about B2B, the B2B buyer's journey, and how you can use content and use technology to engage with a B2B buyer to really help move them through their overall buying process. And also as an extra added benefit, I'm going to explain why and how B2B buyers are exactly like The Bachelor. So raise a hand, how many people in here watch The Bachelor? How many people in here watch The Bachelor but don't want to admit it in a public forum? There we go. Thank you very much. I knew that was the case. So first, let's talk about B2B buyers. The B2B buyers have a cycle, and they go through that cycle really almost in a completely coherent and common way, almost regardless of what product and service you're selling. And what B2B buyers do when they decide that they have a need for something is that they start doing online research. So I'm not very logical, so my cycle starts at about 5 o'clock down there. They start doing their online research. They go out, they look at a bunch of websites, they search Google, they look through all the different potential things that could possibly meet their objectives. Then they probably go out and engage with their peers on social media, primarily Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We find LinkedIn and Twitter to be the most prevalent things used in B2B marketing. Then at some point, they probably identified themselves because good B2B marketers are utilizing things that track those people and honestly when they're on their website, and when they give them a piece of information that identifies who they are. They probably get hit with some outbound marketing materials. Maybe they registered for a white paper somewhere that ended up getting them on a list where they ended up getting hit by things that met their interest. And at some point, they've done enough things where they want to talk to a salesperson. They've narrowed down their choices to maybe 2 or 3 choices. They want to go ahead and talk to that salesperson. At that point, actually, the sales cycle, the amount of time when the salesperson is actually engaged in talking to that prospect is very, very small compared to the overall buyer's journey cycle. And in fact, it's usually about price and it's about feature and function. So all that value that salespeople, B2B salespeople used to be able to deliver early in the sales process, they don't get that opportunity anymore. It's completely gone. So then they make a choice, they buy a product, they end up going through the implementation phase. And by the way, you'll notice that I'm including implementation and customer as the point where they're still a buyer. And the reason is that the cycle says, and this is absolutely true, is that a B2B buyer is always a buyer. There will be times when they're a prospect, and there will be times when they're a customer, but even once they become a customer, they're still a buyer. And you need to treat them at that point very much like they would before you made the sale. And in fact, when it comes to content, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, you need to ensure that at that implementation phase, you're still using content marketing principles. Maybe your purpose is slightly different, but you've got to engage them in that same way and be providing tons of value with content during that phase as well, because it makes that implementation go very, very well. If they're happy, they jump back on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and other social media, become your advocate. They really like it a lot. And then at some point, and this is definitely true in my world, we're software as a service company, and we sign generally 1 year, sometimes 2 or 3 year, but generally 1 year contracts. At the end of the year, they're shopping around. There are alternatives. It's unfortunate, but we don't have a whole lot of big things that create tons of switching costs today in the marketing automation world. It's not very easy, or it is relatively easy for people to make the switch unless you're doing some things really, really well. So they're out there again, and the cycle starts over again. So it goes through that. So how is this like The Bachelor? Well, if you watch The Bachelor, you got a bachelor. He's got 25 or so girls that are there to meet him and become his wife, hopefully. He goes through a process, meets them at a bunch of cocktail parties. He picks a few he likes. He takes them on dates, picks some others he likes, takes them on group dates. Eventually, he winnows some of them out along the way. One advantage he doesn't have, by the way, he can't go out on Twitter and check references. Okay? He can't find out what his peers are doing. Of course, that would kill a lot of the drama in the show because he would eliminate a lot of the people early on that are absolutely a problem. But anyway, so he goes through the process. He eventually goes home to meet their family. Now it's finally like checking references. He takes the last 2 or 3 home to meet his family. That's like getting approval from the boss, the CEO, the CFO to make the purchase. Goes through the process, selects one. And then the last way that he's exactly like a B2B buyer is that after 6 to 12 months, you can bet he's going to be out shopping around again. So, and that's how The Bachelor is exactly like a B2B buyer. We've talked about this a little bit today, and I intimated it a little bit in talking about the B2B buyer cycle. But the fact of the matter is that buyers are out shopping without you. It used to be at that point, early on in the process, wasn't that long ago, 8-10 years, that if marketing delivered a lead to a sales organization, it was a name, a phone number in their target industry, in a target company, and sales took it and ran with it from there. They did all the education through face-to-face meetings, PowerPoint presentations, lunches, all those things. That does not happen anymore. And in fact, buyers do not want to be sold to that way. They want to use the web and social media to create their short list. They're very resistant to sales calls and messaging during this phase. And what this ultimately means is that without that one-to-one interaction, the seller ultimately has no control over the sales process. So what does this mean as a marketer? What it really means as a marketer is that you now are responsible for all of the early stage selling. How do you do that? You use content to engage the prospects and try and drive them through the overall buying process. And then you have to use technology to track their behaviors and automate the interactions. And as has been discussed earlier, marketers are now become publishers, and so it's important that you tell compelling stories. Just briefly, you really need to understand the process by which you do this. You need to think about your customers and really understand the different roles that they take on. So the process that you go through as a B2B marketer is you define their personas and the buying phases that they go through. You then look at your content and you map the content to those personas and different buying phases. Ultimately, you should have a piece of content for each phase, or multiple pieces of content, for each phase that moves the buyer, the specific role of that buyer, from one phase to a next. For instance, maybe you need content that is an education piece that takes a decision maker, the person that's actually making the buy, from the awareness to the consideration phase. Later on, you might need something like a case study, as an example, for the approver to see that, others like me are using this when you're in the decision phase of the overall process. You identify where you've got holes in your content, you fill those holes, you integrate it with the overall sales process, and you track your overall usage by persona and by phase to understand how effective your content is. One of the keys about this is that it's really important that you understand your buyer's process. And to do that, you've got to think both analytically and systematically. It's very true that the vast majority of your buyers are probably to go through the exact same steps. Not only that, but they probably have the same roles in their organizations. It'll change based on size of the organization you're selling to, but in general, you're going to see a whole lot of consistency there. And we talked a little bit earlier in Jamie's pitch about do marketers have the editorial skills they need to create content? What I see is, do marketers have the analytical skills they need to take and turn this into a repeatable process? If you think about your leads and your overall marketing and sales process, what you're really creating is kind of a lead to customer factory. And you need to think about it like a factory. And so that's one of the things that I worry about when I look at what B2B marketers are doing and how effectively they're using our platform, is do they have the ability to go ahead and think in a very process-oriented way? You can use some existing sales data to prime the pump. People say, I don't know where to start. If you've got a CRM, if you use Salesforce.com, if you've been doing anything to track how leads go from becoming a lead to becoming a sale, what were the steps that were taken, got anything that tracks that gives you a start of some data where you can start to make some assumptions and really begin to understand this. And then, frankly, you need to interview the closed buyers and understand their process. Talk with them about these things. A little bit about persona and stage-based messaging. Two things. You define your personas. This is kind of a typical example that we see. And define your buying stages. Again, that's another typical example that we see. And in fact, even myself, I left off after decision, you've got customer time, right? You've got how do you engage them even after the fact, after they become a customer, to ensure that they renew, ensure they don't go somewhere else in 12 to 24 months. It's important when you're developing this messaging that it makes an emotional connection. Earlier in Rod's presentation, there was a question about whether or not the things that he's doing for his primarily B2C business apply to a B2B business. And my belief is that, in fact, they absolutely do. In fact, I think one of the key trends that's happening in B2B marketing today is that it's starting to look a lot more like B2C marketing all the time. And the reason is that B2C marketing has always been very data-driven. I mean, the analytics that go into a typical B2C marketing organization are just, I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling if you think about it. In the B2B world, we haven't worried about that so much because our universes weren't as big, and we had a sales guy to control that process. You don't have that anymore. So, but what you do have is a great data trail of what people are looking at, how they're using your content, and how they're moving through your overall process. So I think that there's an awful lot of commonality between those two things. The other thing that's driving it and making B2C look more like, or B2B look more like B2C, is that as we engage in social media, our professional worlds and our private consumer worlds are melding all the time. So now I know a lot more about the people I'm selling to on a personal level, and so it gives me the ability to engage with them on a personal level around that. A few things about telling a compelling story. First thing you need to do is make sure you're addressing the unique needs of the prospects at their different buying stages. What I've got up here is sort of it's actually a picture of a screenshot from our product of our lead nurturing capability. And the reason I put that up there is because this is the path that tells the story. Someone enters my path at the top, perhaps responds to an email. I send him an email, he responds to it. Based on how he responded to it or didn't respond to it, I can take different actions. If I can understand the process they take, what I can now do is I can map specific pieces of content, and based on their reactions, based on what they do with the content I send them, I can make different decisions about what further content I send them. And by the way, it all happens in an automated way. I mean, it's very programmatic in that sense. So early in the process, you want content that should start a conversation and address their key business issues. Later, you want content that's going to be much more product specific. Think about the things that allow them to get over that hump with respect to buying the actual product. Someone earlier talked about, how do you keep up the momentum? How do you keep people engaged once you start to get them engaged? One of the things we worry about is the cadence. You've got to be very careful not to be annoying when you hit them with things. You don't also want to be creepy, right? So although it happens all the time, there's technologies that let you, in fact, our technology lets you, if someone's on the site who's been on our site before and we know who they are, we send a sales alert off to a sales guy. Sales guy can pick up the phone and give them the call. Okay? A little creepy, but it's effective. And the truth of the matter is that more B2B buyers like that. Why? Because they're thinking about you when they're on the site. If you pick up and give them a phone call, then you've got the ability to engage with them when they're thinking about you. If you're not on the site, they're in the middle of something else, they're not likely to pick up the phone and have that discussion with you. So it's kind of important. And obviously, you need to develop content that progresses and accelerates the prospect's buying cycle. Why does this work? Most important thing is that it leads the prospect through the overall buying cycle. And that's the most critical piece. Earlier, I think I had on my chart, I said it needs to drive them through the buying cycle. That's maybe a little aggressive. But I think that people that do this really, really well are able to do that in a good way. And by the way, it's not always bad to drive somebody out. One of the most important things you need to do is you need to figure out who's really interested and who's really going to buy. If someone is engaging with your content and you're too aggressive with your interactions and they go away, there's a very high likelihood that they were maybe not the best prospect for your product anyway. They've disqualified themselves, I should say. What it does is it preserves your salespeople's time. You want your salespeople to be working on opportunities where they've got the best chance to close. So that's a really, really important thing. It creates a dialogue with the prospects that matches the way they want to buy. That's the most important thing. One of the things that we found is that when you engage with B2B buyers in this way, they appreciate it. It says, you care about the way that I want to be talked to, you care about the way I want to be interacted with, and therefore there's a better likelihood that I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to buy from you. It provides a very clear indication of where the prospect is in the buying cycle. This is really important. One of the things that people end up thinking is that because I don't have a salesperson that's out there talking actively and engaging with this prospect, they don't know where I'm not going to know where my prospect is in the process. And so someone will pick up the phone and they'll start at the beginning of the conversation. The prospect's like, yeah, I already know that. Well, because you're tracking everything they look at, you've got a very good idea about where they are. I know if a CFO comes to our website and looks at something talking about the return on investment of using our product, they're very close to making a decision about where they're going to go. They're way far down that path. Because the CFO is not going to do that when the decision maker's very early in the process. So you can use that information to understand where they are in the overall process. And the last thing, and this is the most important piece, is that it ultimately reduces sales cycle and provides a much more predictable sales pipeline. So people don't think about the fact that content marketing is something that can actually have benefits on the sales side. And if you're a marketer and you're trying to convince your CEO that this is something you need to invest in, this is why you need to go do that. Okay? So, what is the role of marketing automation? Didn't really talk about it earlier. We are a marketing automation company. We have a platform that allows you to track user behavior on your website. We've got an email engine. We've got a whole bunch of things that make it easy for you to essentially, and as I like to say, deliver the right message to the right person at the right time. We allow you to set up complex nurturing programs. We allow you to go ahead and measure your content efficacy. And most importantly, we allow you to integrate with the sales process. But marketing automation is not an end of itself. Marketing automation is a platform. It is a tool. And if you don't have good content, you're not going to be very productive in your use of your marketing automation platform. There's a very symbiotic relationship between the two. By the same token, you can have fantastic content, and you could have the ability to maybe deliver it through just email delivery, but you don't have any automation, you don't have any tracking, you don't have any ways to look at those kind of things, and you're really wasting the investment you've got in your content. So the two of them really go together. And the way I think about it is that kind of marketing automation is the engine, and content is the fuel. And those two things go together really, really nicely. And so if you're going to go make investments in content, you really need to think about your technology platform. Thanks.